tends to be thirstless and warm-blooded, tends to be more warm-blooded, likes and is better from fresh air, from an open air, they want windows open and things like that, and tends to be worse in a hot or stuffy room. Although, that's more true for the chronic picture of pulsatilla than it is for the acute. Pulsatilla in the acute phase oftentimes can be chilly, so you can't necessarily go by that 100%. Pulsatilla's discharges tend to be thick, so like thick mucus coming out of the nose, not thin, clear, or runny. And they tend to be bland, so in other words, they don't necessarily smell or taste like too much of anything, but there's other remedies we'll see later tend to have that. Pulsatilla is a very common one for colds. It tends to be a lot of congestion, a lot of mucus production, and so they tend to, like their ears tend to get plugged up, and it tends to be a lot of mucus and thick congestion. It can be runny and it can be plugged up all at the same time, or it can alternate back and forth. Okay. In terms of food cravings, they're not always, you don't always see them so much in the acute, but pulsatilla, people who need pulsatilla tend to crave more fatty, and this is not in the notes, fatty, creamy food, peanut butter, cream sauces, that kind of thing, buttery things. The next one is bryonia. And with bryonia, we see fever. They tend to be chilly. And the key note or hallmark of bryonia is that they don't want to move and they're worse for moving. They tend to be much, much better if they're staying perfectly still, and much, much worse from sometimes in some cases, the slightest motion. So that would go for the pain, whatever symptoms they're having, cough, sneezing, any of those things. They tend to be worse from motion, even the motion of moving the eyes. They tend to be better lying on the painful side, so they're actually better from pressure, which would be in direct contrast to many other remedies. So if they have chest pain, they lie on their chest, they feel better. They have shoulder pain, they lie on their shoulder, they feel better, as opposed to, there's a lot of remedies where, any kind of touch or pressure would make someone worse. So it's a really useful one for identifying bryonia. The cough tends to be dry with chest pain on coughing, so it's a painful cough, it's a more violent cough. Cough, headache, muscles, aches, everything's all worse from motion. Tends to be a thirst for large quantities of cold drinks at long intervals. So it's not often, but they'll drink like an entire glass of water. They'll drink an entire glass of water, but then they'll satisfy them. They won't need it again for another half hour, an hour or two. The mental emotional picture is this delirium with desire to go home. So this would be more common in like a high fever, the delirium, but the desire to go home, to be quiet or to be irritable and grumpy. And we'll talk more about bryonia. They'll actually talk about matters of business, like they'll need to go home and, in the hospital on their deathbed will want to be like getting up and going home and signing legal contracts because they have to get back to work. So they're concerned about work, about money, about business, and wanting to go home and get out of the sick bed that they're in. Any questions so far? Anything? Okay, gelsemium is the next remedy. This is a very common remedy in fever and flu. Can have a low grade or a high fever. Tends to be more of a gradual onset. Tends to be chilly and have muscle aches. Tends to have fever with great fatigue. This is in stark contrast to some of the other remedies. They tend to be very lethargic and just the eyes are heavy and they just want to close their eyes. They can even have like a dizzy, in the next line, dull, droopy, dizzy, dumb, like this kind of stupor-like state. Chills can extend up and down the back. They tend to be thirstless for sure. So, asking about thirst is really important in any kind of cold or flu because right away if they're very thirsty, that eliminates. It's a very significant symptom. So if someone's very thirsty, that would eliminate all the remedies that tend to be really thirstless. And if they're thirstless, that really pretty much eliminates all the remedies that tend to be very, very thirsty. So that, the really important symptoms in homeopathy that you look at, especially in acute, would be thirst. For chronic and for acute, body temperature is another one that's very important. If a remedy is associated with being very, very chilly and someone's very, very warm, you can't prescribe that remedy for that patient. So these are the things that are more important than just a laundry list of symptoms. Mental and emotional picture here is it can be precipitated by anticipation or bad news. They tend to get worked up about things in advance, so they tend to have, like, the people who tend to be very susceptible to having stage fright, for example. They just want to lie there and rest and want to be quiet, like bryonia. So in parentheses, BRY, that's an abbreviation for bryonia. So when you see that, like that, a remedy in parentheses, when we're talking about a symptom, that means like compare to. So they want to be quiet, just like bryonia. Like lying there and is restless, so they want to change positions, but they'll like very slowly, like, and then do that. And then like maybe 10 minutes later, 5 minutes later even, they'll maybe want to do it again. But like in the aconitum, it's more like, just like change positions and moving around a lot. So it's just a different kind of restlessness. The pains tend to be burning and tend to be better with heat. This is a very, very chilly remedy, arsenicum album. So the patients tend to be chilly. They tend to be worse after midnight till 2 a.m. So like from midnight to 2 a.m., that's the aggravation time. So some remedies have very specific and consistent times of aggravation. Arsenicum album is one of those. It's a hallmark of the remedy to be worse, whatever the symptom is, they're worse from midnight to 2 a.m. Bryonia, I didn't put it down, but is worse 9 p.m., sometimes 9 a.m. But 9 p.m. is a hallmark of bryonia. They tend to have a lot of thirst for small, frequent sips of water. It could be cold or warm or room temperature, doesn't matter, but the fact that they're thirsty for just small sips constantly, that's a hallmark of, or a keynote of arsenicum album. The mental emotional picture, like I said, is very anxious and restless. And there's also a fear of death, like aconitum. They're better from company, whereas aconitum wants to be left alone. And they tend to be fastidious, like they like things a certain way, very neat and orderly and tidy. So that's important for arsenicum album. All right, phosphorus is a very common remedy in fevers and colds and flus, especially when they are involving cough, and it's a common remedy when a cough turns into bronchitis. It tends to be later stages. It's often indicated in pneumonia as well. Here it says, every cold goes into the chest. And phosphorus people tend to be sensitive. They tend to also be better from company and from consolation. They're greatly better just from being touched. Their parent or partner comes home and just to the touch of the other person can make a big difference and make them feel greatly better. They tend to be sensitive. There tends to be one common sensation in phosphorus is just a sensation of burning in general. Pains tend to be burning pains, and especially a burning between the shoulder blades, between the scapulae, is very common. They tend to be worse lying on the left and or the painful side, and they tend to be better lying on the right side. That's huge. If someone has chest pain and they're worse lying on the right side or better lying on the left side, it really goes against phosphorus.